Respected doctor, myself Dr. Nitin Kapure, a senior medical advisor from Alkem Lab, a qualified doctor with a post-graduation in MD Pharmacology. On behalf of Alkem Lab, it is my great pleasure to welcome to this international speaker program. As you know, MDD is one of the most common serious psychiatric disorder, affecting more than 55 million people in India. And despite the addition of many new drugs in last 2 to 3 decades, still most of the patient, I would say more than 30% of the patient have issue of the treatment-resistant depression. Further, many patients suffer from the adverse effect of antidepressant, which is responsible for poor adherence as well as the discontinuation. Therefore, the need to discover the new drug with the improved efficacy and the better tolerability is always been there. Votoxin is a novel antidepressant approved by the important regulatory bodies, including India, for the management of MDD. We, as a Alkem, also launched this product recently, 4 to 5 months back, and want to disseminate the most up-to-date scientific information regarding this with you for the better patient management. So for this particular talk, we have an eminent international speaker, Dr. Michael Thess, who is a renowned teacher, mentor, administrator, researcher, and clinician. And sir will talk on this novel treatment option, and sir will try to address the queries. So for this talk, before he's going to talk, I am just going to introduce Dr. M.S. Reddy sir also, who is going to moderate the event, right? So sir, Dr. M.S. Reddy sir is sir did a post graduation in MD Psychiatry from the well-known Medical College CMC Vellore. Sir also did the management from the ISB, one of the premium institute. Sir is a director of Asha Bipolar Clinic, Hyderabad. Sir is a past president of IAPP, Indian Association of Private Psychiatry. Sir is a past president of Indian Association of Biological Psychiatry. And sir is also honorable secretary of Society of Bipolar Disorder, India. Currently, sir was also the editor for the Indian Journal of Psychological Medicine from the year 2006 to 2017. A council member of Asian Network of Bipolar Disorder, ANBD, a council member of Association of Neuropsychopharmacology, AANP, and sir is currently the member of editorial board of World Journal of Biological Psychiatry, that is WJPP, and member of the editorial board of Asian Journal of Psychiatry. So with this, I am handing over session to Dr. M.S. Reddy sir, and sir will introduce the speaker and also introduce the panelist, and also going to take the Q&A session. So with this, I am handing over session to Dr. M.S. sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Nitin, for your very kind introduction. I welcome Professor Michael Edward Thess. I think every psychiatrist knows about Michael Thess. His monumental work in the field of depression, and especially so many scholarly papers he has published. We welcome you, sir. I also welcome Dr. Ranjan, who is going to be the panelist for today's meeting. Professor Thess is renowned as a teacher, mentor, administrator, researcher, and clinician. He has been elected to the membership of American College of Psychiatrists and then American College of Neuropsychopharmacology. In 2019, he was elected to the membership of Penn Medicine's Academy of Masters Clinics in honor bestowed to only 2% of the medical faculty. That's one of the rare honors Michael Thess had. He is immediate past president and member of the board of directors of American Society of Clinical Psychopharmacology, founding fellow of the Academy of Cognitive Therapy, and a member of advisory boards of Anxiety Depressive Disorders Association, National Network of Depression Centers, and the Depression Bipolar Support Alliance, and American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. One of the world's most highly gifted, cited child psychiatrists, Professor Thess, 900 plus scholarly peer-reviewed publications include a number of citations he has authored, co-edited, and also the award-winning Learning Cognitive Therapies among the 18 books Professor Thess has authored. And Professor Thess' research has been continuously funded by federal agencies for the last 3.5 decades and currently focuses on novel therapies for difficult to treat depressive disorders and dissemination implementation of cost-effective forms of cognitive behavior therapy. And now I also introduce our panelist, Dr. Ranjan Bhattacharya, who is Associate Professor and HOD, Department of Psychiatry, Murshidabad Medical College in West Bengal. He is the director of Cherak Square Diagnostic and Research Center as a visiting consultant to many hospitals like Ruby General Hospital, another super specialty hospital, Narayana Memorial Hospital. And his basic areas of interest and specialization is addiction psychiatry, sexual medicine, child and adolescent psychiatry. He has 52 publications to his credit and a lot of awards. IMA, Dr. R.N. Murthy National Award for 2019 and 20, and organizing position as Honorary Secretary, IMA Bengal, and Direct Council member of IPS. He is also Life Fellow of American Psychiatric Association, Indian Psychiatric Society, Indian Association of Private Psychiatry, Geriatric Mental Health, and also Association of Biological Psychiatry. With this introduction, now I would request Michael Theis to make his presentation on vortioxetine, which is a promising molecule in the management of major depressive disorder. Over to you, Professor Theis.
Thank you so much for that truly gracious, almost embarrassingly so warm introduction, Dr. Reddy. It's my great privilege to be talking with you today about what I believe is your newest antidepressant in India, vortioxetine, and it is indeed a promising new treatment. I just want to point out that our medical school is called the Perelman School of Medicine. That's at the University of Pennsylvania, and I'm also a member of the medical and research staff of our affiliated Veterans Hospital, which is, the official name is the Corporal Michael J. Crescents Medical Center. So let's see. Oh no, there we go. So we are going to talk about the management of depression and quickly focus on vortioxetine, how it came to be, its efficacy and its psychopharmacology and its safety profile. And this fits within a broader spectrum of treatments available for people with major depressive disorder, beginning with self-help strategies and exercise, and including psychotherapy, and of course a range of first and second and third line pharmacotherapies, and the neuromodulation strategies, but particularly electroconvulsive therapy for patients who have not benefited from antidepressant medicine or maybe are too ill and urgently need vigorous treatment. In India, as in the United States, the serotonin selective or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, are well-deserved first-line treatment options. Their safety on a day-to-day basis and in overdose is legendary, and they are now not at all costly and make safe, easy to prescribe treatment a reasonable first line. For some patients, serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors represent an equally good, if not somewhat more effective, first-line treatment, particularly for those with higher levels of severity or for painful physical symptoms. And of course, the SNRIs generally are used as a preferred second step treatment for patients who have not responded to SSRIs. But of course, we have a number of other antidepressants throughout the world introduced after 1980. I say 1980 because that's sort of the watermark between the first generation and second generation of antidepressants. And in India and in the United States, these medications include mirtazapine and bupropion, and in some parts of the world still represent nifazodone and some forms of trazodone. So there are a range of other strategies. There are still patients who maybe only respond to tricyclic antidepressants and monoamine oxidase inhibitors. And in the United States, at least, we make increasing use of newer generation antipsychotics as adjunctive treatments. We use them in a second or third line situation to try to augment or enhance the response of an SSRI or an SNRI. And we don't have really good ways of matching patients to specific antidepressant treatments. This is based on social factors such as cost and patient preference. Patient preference may have to do with their own past experience, the experience of a family member, or just what they've read about a particular medicine and how it fits with what they're looking for. Obviously, Side effect profile is a determining factor. If you've had terrible side effects with one SSRI, you probably will go outside of the serotonin reuptake inhibiting mechanism when you pick another antidepressant, and then a host of other difficulties, including how complicated the patient's medical health is. Importantly, we do not have a foolproof way of matching patients to treatment, and what we can do is make our best choice and then learn from it and be smarter in selecting the next treatment if the first treatment goes poorly. This is my assessment of the current unmet needs in antidepressant drug therapy. And I think it is well known that the specific advantage of our favorite drugs over a well-crafted and well-administered placebo is modest, only about 15% on average in controlled studies. Some people say this is unimportant, trivial. They are wrong. And plus, there is no placebo response in clinical practice outside of your administration of the treatment that you picked for the patient. So in our care of patients, the placebo response is part of the good that we do. About 10% of patients have trouble tolerating reuptake inhibitors, and some patients have trouble tolerating both reuptake inhibitors and other newer generation antidepressants. And I think we do have to recognize that the cost of selectivity is sometimes a limit in the breadth or the range of symptom benefit. So the most highly selective antidepressants often don't have especially strong or quick effects for insomnia or some kinds of anxiety. And then as we've gotten into the 21st century, we've appreciated how incompletely remitting sometimes the cognitive symptoms of depression can be as well. Now, all of our transporter or receptor targeted treatments that focus on monoamine systems are slow. They take several weeks to show benefit, to separate from placebo. They take typically 4 to 6 weeks to see a response reliably, and sometimes 6 to 8 or even 10 or 12 weeks to show the maximum response or a full remission. And then I think the holy grail of treatment development is to find mechanisms of action that are different than those that target monoamine transporters or monoamine receptors, because indeed there is a subset of patients, maybe as many as 25%, who just don't obtain an adequate response with our first and second line antidepressant medications. And so this is partly where vortioxetine comes in, because it was synthesized by the same group of clinicals of psychopharmacologists and commercial chemists who developed citalopram and escitalopram. And they went about this drug development intelligently to try to make a drug that improved upon standard SSRIs. And the path that they chose was modifying the impact of serotonin reuptake inhibition with a suite. And by suite, I mean like a musical suite with multiple instruments, with a suite of effects on pre and postsynaptic serotonin receptors that I'll show you here in a moment. In India, the general dose range for vortioxetine centers around 10 milligrams, although you will have patients who occasionally respond to 5 and some who may require 20 milligrams. In the United States, we had stronger evidence for 20 milligrams, and so we tend to go towards the 20 milligram dose quicker than you may need to do elsewhere in the world. I like the 5 milligram dose for patients who have a history of sensitivity to other antidepressants, and as I'll show you in a moment, you can infer from receptor affinity studies that this drug is different at 5 milligrams than it might be at 20 milligrams, and therefore may help different patients at both lower and higher doses. The drug has a modest discontinuation syndrome when it has been effective and treatment has been sustained over a number of weeks or months. And so I do not recommend abrupt discontinuation when you have the luxury to do it. If it's a short course and it hasn't worked, you can be done with it quickly and move on. The drug has about the same risk of birth defects or complications for pregnancy as our other favorite first-line treatments, such as sertraline, for example. And in the US FDA calls it a category C drug, meaning that there is no specific known birth defect or teratogenic complication known with the drug, but that it cannot be assumed to be universally safe. And so here's what I mean by the suite of effects. And again, that's SUITE, not SWEET. That this drug is a serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and it has no meaningful effect on dopamine or norepinephrine uptake sites. The drug has a range of agonist, partial agonist, and antagonist effects across the subfamilies of the serotonin 1A, of the serotonin 1 receptor, and it is uniquely serotonin 3 and serotonin 7 antagonist. It is the only antidepressant that has the serotonin 1A effect paired with the 3 effect and the 7 effect. And so this really is a unique profile. And this wasn't accidentally discovered. They worked and worked and worked to get this balance of effects. And so when I said you may notice that the drug behaves differently between 5 and 20 milligrams, this is a model based on pharmacokinetic data and projected. These results come from not from humans, but from estimations based on modeling. But you can see that the first effect that should be evident in humans is the serotonin 3 effect. That is the most potent of its receptor effects, followed then by the sertraline, by the serotonin uptake inhibition. That's the second effect. And you will notice in the concentrations we get when we take this drug as a medicine, the 5 to 20 milligram range, there is just about a linear growth in how much serotonin occupancy, how much transporter occupancy you would expect to see. And then the least potent of the effects are the serotonin 1A and 1B effect, which tend to be recruited at the higher doses, 10, 15, 20, at least based on these projections. The drug is easily bioavailable. You get it into your brain at a linear level that is approximate to the dose. So you know on average someone who's taking 20 milligrams is getting twice as much drug into their system as someone who's taking 10 milligrams. This will be important later. It takes about half a day, a third of a day from a dose to get to the peak level for that dose. And it takes about 3 or 4 days to get to the elimination half-life at steady state. And so you will see that patients, you don't want to make adjustments on a weekly basis with let's say a 3-day elimination half-life. You generally want to make your adjustments on a every 2-week basis, unless of course patients have side effects. But if you make a reduction because of side effects, remember that 3-day elimination half-life tells you that it might take a week to see a significant relief of a side effect after you make a reduction. The drug is very extensively metabolized by the cytochrome P450 isoenzymes. This means that it is less bothered or less adversely affected by co-therapy with a 2D6 inhibitor or a 3A4 inhibitor because there are multiple alternate pathways of elimination. Metabolites are eliminated in urine, so you may have to make a dose adjustment in a patient with bad kidney failure. Similarly, the drug is, because it is extensively metabolized in the liver, you would need to make a dose adjustment in a patient with significant liver failure. So this is a summary of the entire world's evidence that I worked with in 2015 to do a comprehensive and complete meta-analysis of the data. And here you see two vertical lines in this forest plot. The solid line, which is on your right side of the screen, is the line of no effect. And then the dotted line is the line that corresponds to a clinically meaningful effect. And you can see, I hope, across the whole range of studies done in the first 12 years of drug development, that approximately 2/3 of the studies found a clinically and statistically significant effect, and that effect ranged between 5 milligrams and 20 milligrams, with 5 milligrams showing efficacy outside of the US and 20 milligrams required within the US. We can talk about that in the question answer period if you want. I do not think this is because we have more adipose tissue than the rest of the world. That is a hypothesis. I believe actually this was done in a time in which it was harder to detect a significant drug effect in studies done in the US. And since the 20 milligram dose is the strongest dose, and I'll show you evidence of that in a moment, I believe that's why we needed to do the 20 milligram studies in the US, whereas elsewhere in the world, the 5 and 10 milligram studies carried the day. As you can see towards the bottom, not every study was significant, but this is true of every drug. And generally, when the study drug was not significant in clinical trials, it was because of a fairly high or an unexpectedly high placebo response. This is the proper meta-analysis from that body of studies that I just reviewed with you. If we look at all of the data from all of the studies, including those done in the US, there is a linear dose response relationship between 5 and 10, and then between 10 and 20, with 15 milligrams looking oddly outside a linear dose response relationship. But if you remove the US studies from the meta-analysis, you will see that 10 is modestly better than 5, and 20 and 15 are modestly better than 10, with no advantage on average for 15 over 10. We don't use the 15 milligram dose much in the US. I'd be interested if you use it in India as well. So this really shows us that this drug has ascending dose response characteristics, and that the odd performance of the 15 milligram really is an artifact of the fact that those were the studies done in the US at the higher doses that had trouble showing signal detection. So there's one new important study that I've added outside of the meta-analysis that I wanted to talk with you about tonight, and that is an Asian study done in Japan that compares the 10 and 20 milligram doses. Now I know Japan is not India, but this is as relevant as I can come, and I think importantly, as you can see in the right-hand side here, the 10 and 20 milligram doses were indistinguishable in this Japanese study, that there was no efficacy advantage for 20 over 10. And so I take from this that you should give 10 milligrams at least several weeks to have a chance to work before you automatically up-titrate the medication, that there's no routine reason to anticipate having to go to 20 milligrams. I would reserve the 20 milligram dose for patients who have had 3-4 weeks of exposure to 10 milligrams without benefit. And again, based on availability and kind of your own local customs, whether you would use the 15 milligram dose as an in-between step or not, I think is a matter of clinical practice. Now, the Japanese study had a really nice self-report questionnaire about subjective cognitive impairment. It's called the Perceived Deficits Questionnaire. And as we'll talk about a little bit later, one of the hidden advantages of this drug is that it has some procognitive or cognitive enhancing effects that differentiate itself from other antidepressants. The manufacturer is not allowed to advertise on this benefit in the United States. The FDA does permit the studies to be included in the description of the evidence base. So you can see that the drug has some cognitive enhancing effects that may be better than other agents. But here's just one example of it. And the PDQ, which has a slightly vulgar meaning in those initials in English, but we won't go into that right now. You can see in the PDQ that there's a hint on a couple of the measures that the 20 milligram dose may have a stronger cognitive enhancing effect than the 10 milligram dose. But you would have needed to have done a study about twice as large as this one with a non-inferiority question in order to truly test whether you got an incremental cognitive advantage going from 10 to 20. Since we think it's the serotonin 7 effect that enhances cognition over and above antidepressant response, you might think you would need the higher dose to see that benefit. But this remains a hypothesis that's not proven. Now, here's another study that focused on cognitive function and dysfunction, and it is a study in which there was a flexible dose of vortioxetine, and it was a flexible dose of escitalopram. So this is a study with an active comparator. Does the drug have cognitive enhancing effects over and above a good standard first-line antidepressant? And of course, before you can interpret change in cognition, you need to interpret change in clinical benefit. And here you can see in the darker shade of blue, the vortioxetine outcome, and in the gray, the escitalopram outcome. And in terms of response rates, there was about a 10% advantage. The study was not large enough to declare that 10% advantage to be statistically significant. On the right side, you see remission rates, and there was about a twofold increase in remission rates according to the self-report PHQ-9, nearly 40% in the vortioxetine group, slightly less than 20% in the escitalopram group. That was statistically significant. It was not statistically significant when you used a different definition of remission, the CGI severity scale. So there was, I would say, a slight but inconsistent advantage for vortioxetine over escitalopram in this particular study. Now let's look at the cognitive changes here. And here we have vortioxetine indexed against escitalopram. So if the bars go up, that is an advantage, an effect size advantage for vortioxetine. If the bar goes down, that is an effect size advantage for escitalopram. And you can see across the board a modest advantage for escitalopram for vortioxetine over escitalopram. Most of these differences are not statistically significant, however. They are interesting trends. Again, you would need a larger study with a true test of non-inferiority in order to make the definitive examination of this hypothesis. Well, what about sexual dysfunction? Because remember, serotonin 1A partial agonism is one of the time-honored strategies we use to sometimes have an antidote to SSRI or SNRI-related sexual side effects. And so this drug has that serotonin 1A partial agonism built in to its mechanism of action. And which group of patients would be the most vulnerable to include in a study? Well, I would pick people who had a history of sexual side effects who had quit an SSRI in the past because they did not like its effects on orgasm or delayed orgasm or quality of orgasm or even its effects on libido. And so that's how this study was done. It's a larger study. So here now we do have a chance to see a meaningful difference if there is one that exists. There are more than 200 patients in each of the arms. And the study is delimited to people who have had treatment emergent SSRI sexual dysfunction. They are randomized double blind to vortioxetine versus escitalopram. And so remember, escitalopram is not the worst of the SSRIs when it comes to sexual side effects. So this is a strict test. And again, let's start out with how did the two drugs perform in terms of clinical benefit? And that's what you see here on the top. It's change in the Montgomery-Åsberg score. In the bottom, it's improvement in the clinical global impression score. I hope you can see with your own eyes that the drugs were equally effective, very comparably effective in this particular study. These are all people previously treated with an SRI who stopped their SSRI in this depressive episode in order to get rid of their sexual side effects. So now what happened to their sexual side effects? We use the Clayton scale in this study, and it is a good self-report scale that does show sensitivity to change. And I think you can see that by the fourth week of treatment, that there was a greater risk of sexual side effects in the escitalopram group compared to the vortioxetine group, as reflected by a lower score on the Clayton Sexual Function Questionnaire. Again, a lower score means less satisfying sexual activity, less satisfying, less capability in sexual domains than a higher score. So I add this medicine now to my list of alternatives that I might use when I have a patient who has an unacceptable sexual side effect. It is one of the serotonin reuptake inhibitors that does indeed have less risk of sexual side effects than some of the others. Well, what about metabolic profile? You know, this is an idiosyncratic effect with SSRIs and SNRIs. About 5 or 10% of people will gain weight over time when treated with a serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Maybe the SSRIs or a class are a little worse at this effect than the SNRIs. But what if you studied a group of patients for whom weight gain was an unacceptable and worrisome side effect? Well, I can think of no more interesting group than a group of patients with adult onset diabetes mellitus as a high risk group, a group of patients that you would want to avoid a weight gain. And this study was a comparison of vortioxetine and sertraline. And again, sertraline is not the SSRI with the highest risk of weight gain. That's likely to be paroxetine. But that said, it is a stringent test against one of the standards that is not notorious for its risk of weight gain. Again, these treatments were equally effective. The benefit was identical for sertraline and vortioxetine in this study. But for those who benefited from treatment and stayed on in the longer term, there were improvements in both weight loss and in the glycosylated hemoglobin, the hemoglobin A1C levels that were not evident in the sertraline arm, that were evident in the vortioxetine arm. So vortioxetine had a more favorable metabolic effect than sertraline in this study of patients with type 2 diabetes. So that gives it another subtle advantage. And where would I pick this medicine in comparison to some of my favorites? In my country, new medicines are tangibly more expensive than older medicines. And so we sometimes have to reserve new medicines for second line use and need to treat people first with less expensive medications. This is an unfortunate way that the economics affect your practice, but for some countries, or even if you're not really familiar with vortioxetine yet, you may have it in your second line bin of choices. So this means knowing how it works in patients who you're switching from an SSRI to a second line strategy is an important question. So I got the opportunity to review the literature on switch studies and determine effect sizes of the magnitude of success for a range of antidepressant treatments, while colleagues in Europe were doing a study that compared vortioxetine with a drug called agomelatine. I don't know if you have it in India or not, but we don't have it in the United States. But in that study, vortioxetine was significantly more effective than agomelatine. And I think importantly, when we compared it in the context with other studies, here you see the agomelatine study. There are the switch findings for sertraline, venlafaxine, bupropion, and citalopram were all of about the same magnitude. So indeed, this medicine may shine as a second line choice, even though I don't think it should be used second line. When the circumstances justify second line use, I think it is valuable. So now I just want to wrap up and talk about tolerability. I've told some of the high points, but I just want to make sure that you know that it is generally well tolerated, and all in all, its dropout rate and its tolerability rate are comparable to your other first-line favorites within the SSRI family. In the study of diabetes, it had some advantages in terms of metabolic profile compared to a perfectly good SSRI. In the study of patients with sexual side effects, it had a preferred profile compared to escitalopram. Nausea is the most common occurring side effect. This is another reason to initially focus on the 5 milligram dose. Headache is the second most common side effect, but patients have about a 19 out of 20 chance of tolerating this as a first-line medicine if you prescribe it artfully. So I think just in summary, it has the same advantages of safety and overdose. It does not have significant cardiovascular side effects. It doesn't have an adverse effect on blood pressure, and it has some unique advantages in terms of sexual side effects, in terms of metabolic profile for patients with diabetes, and in terms of cognition that make it certainly a worthy consideration. So I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. We have lots of unmet needs that challenge our pharmacotherapy of people with depression. We have a range of alternate choices for people who don't respond to SSRIs or SNRIs. But this drug is unique in its modified serotonin profile. It has a dose-dependent effect on the serotonin transporter and dose-dependent effects on a range of serotonin receptors that make it an interesting and unique serotonin modulator. I think its efficacy is well established. You have an efficacy range of 5 to 20 milligrams worthwhile throughout the world. And I think that it is a very welcome addition to your regimen of medications. And so on that note, I'm going to pause and get ready to take your questions. I'm going to ask for a 2-minute break so that I can return an urgent call from my daughter who may be lost on her way to soccer practice. So bear with me while I return the call, and I'm just going to do my screen and mute my
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Theis. I think everyone here agrees that it's like a very informative and outstanding talk, especially from someone who has done a lot of work in that particular molecule. Before I go for questions, and then maybe I'll ask Ranjan also for his opinion. In my like in a brief experience in the last 3-4 months, I find this molecule is efficacy-wise, it seems to be, I can't say right now immediately as effective as escitalopram, but that seems to be quite an effective molecule as an antidepressant. The side effect profile-wise, a few side effects like nausea, vomiting is that, and then I don't know, peculiarly, maybe others also can share, almost 30% of the patients have a complaint of itching in the first few days, which doesn't go on to develop rash, subsides after the first few days, and then there is no problem with that. So if this molecule, the two major things, like one is a sexual dysfunction and then weight gain, if it scores on those two components over escitalopram, that's going to be a very good molecule, very good addition to our armamentarium of antidepressants in the management of MDD. Now, before we go on to questions, I would request Dr. Ranjan to make his comments. And then once Professor Thes returns, we'll take up the questions. Dr.
Yes, sir.
Ranjan? Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor M.S. Reddy, sir, for giving me this opportunity. Absolutely fascinating and brilliant talk by Professor Michael E. Thes. So till now, as we can summarize with sir's talk, that there is an unmet need for choosing an antidepressant. We have come across the STAR-D trial, and we have found that only 1/3 of patients are responding to the drug. And as you mentioned, if you can access with the HAM-D score cutoff value 7 or MADRS score cutoff value 10, then we can access what could be the response and what could be the remission. These are the completely different ball games. Now, coming to the different lacunae, even the this trial, STAR-D trial has shown that if we choose 4 antidepressant, we're getting the response max to max 66% case in 2/3 of patients. And this effect remains very ill sustained, only lasts for 4 to 6 months. So the patient will invariably bound to the relapse, and remissions are rules rather than exception. Now, there is a traditionally lacunae. We have come across the tricyclic antidepressant, MAO inhibitors, SSRI, SNRIs, NASA group of drug, NARI. Lots of molecules are there, but each molecule is unique. Vortioxetine is very, very promising ground on theoretical ground. When it hit the market, when it got the approval in 2013 May, and Indian DCGI approved in 2018 May. But during this pandemic period, you don't get that opportunity to get a trial of this molecule. Only for the last 6 or 8 months, we are having this ample opportunity to try this molecule. So traditionally, apart from the SART inhibition, it has a host of action, as mentioned by Professor Thes already. 5-1 a full agonism, 5-1B partial agonism, 5-1D 3/7 antagonism. So this has each and every unique therapeutic targets and its clinical implications therefore thereof. So as particularly my clinical experiences in Indian scenario, the most limiting factor we ask about the cost of therapy. What could be the cost of the drug? The escitalopram is much cheaper drug. We have many drugs available in our government hospital facilities. So what drug should we use? Now, vortioxetine is a very, very categorically, I have used it, and I have found till that first thing is discontinuation rate is much lower. Most of my patient completed the drug therapy. Very, very less of the people. We are getting anxious and keeping our finger crossed whenever any molecule hits the market, like a kid finding its own toy. We get over enthusiastic and really think about using it. Vortioxetine is that a molecule that have very, very few of patients discontinue the medicine, and most of the patients come across with the GI side effects. That's true. Now, the unique part is that there's no drug-drug interaction, less drug-drug interaction, very minimal. I have not found any health hazards related to it. We do not go for the ECG monitoring, QTC prolongation phenomenon. We don't have the weight gain issue, the burning issue of this patient. A patient who is chronically mentally ill, he or she has to take the drug for a prolonged period. No sexual side effect. Most of this SSRI group of drug with no cause delayed ejaculation, sexual dysfunction. But vortioxetine is very, very promising in this aspect. And apart from that, as Professor Thes has shown in one of his slides, that it belongs to the category C drug by FDA, though it has not been yet approved for the child, adolescent, or in pregnancy. But till there is a promise, it is not a category D or not a category X drug. So these are the hopes, and other things will evolve. I think that till the experience I have used also the 5 milligram dose. At a dose of 5 milligram, it is efficacious. In geriatric population, maybe the lesser dose will be more effective, but 10 milligram dose is fine. I got maximum responses 10, 20 milligram dose. I have ceiling those dose, but I found that some discontinuation is there with this dose. So back to Professor M.S. Reddy, sir.
Welcome back, Professor Thes. It was an excellent lecture. We have a few questions here.
Okay.
One of the important points is that how effective this is in bipolar depression, and what is the incidence of switch?
Yeah. So the risk of a switch in a patient with bipolar depression has not been studied in a placebo-controlled way with this medicine. I would estimate that it has the same risk as serotonin uptake inhibitors and likely a lower risk than that of an SNRI. And so that would mean that if you were treating a patient with bipolar disorder who had switched before, who was not taking a mood stabilizer, so two things you shouldn't do, right? If the person has switched before, you want to do double mood stabilizer if possible, and you don't want to prescribe an SSRI unless they're on a mood stabilizer in general practice. But let's say that happened, you might have a 25% chance of a switch without a mood stabilizer. The mood stabilizer will reduce the risk of switch down to an acceptable 5, 6, 7% kind of range. I like this treatment because of its weight loss profile and its lower risk of sexual side effects for people with bipolar disorder. The metabolic burden of their mood stabilizers is enough to deal with.
Yes, thank you. One more point is that do you find it effective in the management of MDD with psychosis?
I haven't used it in MDD with psychosis. So in part, superstitiously, I think, because we don't have evidence from its use yet, and in part, the suite of postsynaptic and presynaptic serotonin effects would be a little more complicated in combination with a newer generation antipsychotic, because they have some overlapping and different effects in this area. So in the absence of good studies and my own clinical experience, I don't recommend it. And I think if you used a more straightforward antipsychotic medication, say, for example, risperidone, that you should not have trouble with too many drug-drug interactions related to the serotonin receptor effects.
What's your take on vortioxetine usage in depression in childhood, and also the geriatric depression?
Yeah.
The
Well,
age
this drug is very well suited for geriatrics and has been studied carefully in older patients. There is the single, not that large study in adolescents demonstrating safety, but as in other studies of adolescents, the evidence of efficacy is not so compelling. There are things about it that adolescents should like: cognitive enhancing, no sexual side effects, and yes, our adolescents do have sex lives and so forth. So we need to take that into account. I think the favorable weight profile is an advantage for younger patients, but it is not well studied in younger patients yet.
Dr. Ranjan, would you like to comment on that in your experience, childhood and then geriatric cases?
Yes, sir. Before that, I must congratulate Professor Michael Theis for such an elaborating, fascinating discussion. And we had literally been mesmerized with your talk, sir. Fantastic, sir. So, yeah, children and adolescents, as mentioned by sir, that there is a trial going for on the effect of the vortioxetine on children and adolescents. Though the FDA has not yet approved the drug for this group, the special population we have come across with Professor Theis talk, the elderly we can use, but there are literatural evidence in literature that at a dose of 5 milligram may be efficacious. Because regarding the pregnancies, that has already been mentioned that this is a group, category C group of drug, but it is yet not approved for pregnancy. In the children and adolescent, we know there are issues, the black box warning from the Types memorial with fluoxetine, but vortioxetine has not been yet approved. But why not? It holds promise. We need a big trial for that. We had a come across on a small trial. I don't find any limitation or restriction of using vortioxetine in children and adolescents. This group is very important, and according to the TAD study, TADA study, we have found that the adolescent depression is very, very unique, and we need to curb it, or we need to treat it in an appropriate manner to prevent the adolescent suicide. So vortioxetine is a molecule could be having a little earlier onset of action, and with a host of SART inhibition and other molecules of host action, 5-1 agonism, 1B partial agonism, 1D, 2C, 1D, 3 and 7, 5-7 antagonism. It holds a lots of theoretical promise.
Yeah, so the conclusion can be we can sort of give it a try, but with some caution, because in the children and then older age, dosages and then other factors we need to take into consideration.
Right.
Professor Theis, your comment on any specific group of depressive disorders where vortioxetine is more effective, like anxious depressions or melancholic depressions, something like that. Do you comment on that?
I don't have a sense that it is uniquely more effective for anxious versus non-anxious. I don't have a sense that in our meta-analysis, we found that as severity increased, the magnitude of the benefit also increased. And so as you move from non-melancholic to melancholic, I think the chances of this drug working actually increase. But this is true for some SNRIs and escitalopram. Also. So I don't have a niche to put this drug in. I find it to be broadly useful and certainly a worthy stablemate for your other favorite first-line antidepressants.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. At any point of time in your clinical experience, did you have to use a higher than 20 milligrams, like 30 or 40 milligrams in some of the recent cases? In anything of your experience?
I can't advise you about that. I have never prescribed over 20 milligrams. As I mentioned, it is placed in a second or third tier in the United States, and just to get it, I need to work through an algorithm, and our pharmacy benefit will not pay for more than 20 milligrams. So I would do an adjunct. I would do an adjunct if I had an adequate benefit at 20 rather than increase.
It may not be relevant for this particular today's topic, but generally, most of these serotonergic system acting drugs, we will try to know like an experiment in OCD also. Would you like to comment on that, or we'll hold? What is your take on that?
You know, the unmet need for OCD is so great, and we look for something in between our favorite SSRIs and clomipramine, right? Because clomipramine, while it is probably more effective than the SSRIs, it is more difficult to prescribe and more side effects and so forth. I would place it in the group of medicines that I would think of using for the OCD patient. I don't think anything about the secondary effects on serotonin receptors gets in the way of treating OCD patients. You know that you can sometimes see drugs that have serotonin 1A effects like trazodone accidentally increasing through the MCPP mechanism, but this drug doesn't have that. That's a metabolite of trazodone, not an effect of the serotonin 1A. So.
Yes. Yeah, you give us some hope for both. Let's try this.
Well, that hope is a good thing in life.
Yes, exactly. Have you noticed the side effect of pruritus, itching?
Yeah.
As a significant side effect
I
in
think
any of
it is about a 1 or 2% side effect. I view it as a what's the word I want? A form frust, if you will, of a subtle allergy. It may have to do with other factors such as changes in biometabolism and so forth with other drugs. But if I have had to stop this drug because of itching, but the risk of allergy is no greater with this than any other medication. And when you have multiple manufacturers, then you will have different sources of dye, right? And sometimes the allergic reaction that people experience has more to do with dye than it has to do with the medicine itself. DYE. Sometimes I know my English doesn't sound like your English, and so when I say dye, I'm referring to the coloring of the pill.
Yeah, I think more or less we have answered questions. Dr. Ranjan, would you like to?
Yeah. One question has come from Dr. Jaquim D. Souza. He's asking that what is the best adjunct with vortioxetine? Sir, can you elaborate on this?
The best adjunct to vortioxetine, well, because of its complex effects on serotonin neurotransmission, I would not use buspirone. So I'm going to go the opposite of this and say that I would not use buspirone as an adjunct here. I think it works well with lithium, with thyroid hormone, and with some newer generation antipsychotics. As I mentioned, other newer generation antipsychotics, for example, aripiprazole or brexpiprazole, have some overlapping serotonin receptor effects themselves. And so I might worry a little bit about those medicines working at cross purposes to each other. And so I think if I thought a newer generation antipsychotic was indicated, I'd be more likely to do risperidone or quetiapine at low doses.
Okay, being a researcher, there are two queries from my end, sir. So we have come across with the focus study where the molecule has been compared with the placebo, and in the connect study, the molecule has been compared with the duloxetine. My first question to you, first, is there any other head-to-head trial is going on? And second question is, can we do a network analysis like the Lute meta-analysis, like the network analysis with this molecule? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, there are studies with venlafaxine from the very beginning, then duloxetine was the chosen comparator early on in Europe. Escitalopram was chosen 2-3 times for selective purposes, sertraline in both an elderly study and in the diabetes study, and then agomelatine in the switch study in Europe. I do not know if in Japan or China there were different active comparators used. So yes, the next time the Cochrane collaboration does the network meta-analysis with vortioxetine, you will see evidence of where it falls in relation to a wide range of antidepressants. That was not yet possible in the last Cochrane meta-analysis.
One more question in the chat box, sir. Is there any evidence of using vortioxetine in treatment-resistant depression?
At the level 2 or level 3, yes. If you're looking for a well-tolerated medicine that offers some value over simply another SSRI. Here your choice would be SNRI versus vortioxetine. And I think that would be a good study to do in India, frankly, because you have access to vortioxetine and you have access to SNRIs, and this is an important question. I would not do a third study of another SSRI. I would look for the SNRI as the comparator. Now, its tolerability profile makes it well suited to be a platform for then adjunctive strategies, which you might put in the third line. And so I see it, for people who don't respond to SSRIs, I think it is a perfectly good next alternative. So I would say early in the treatment hierarchy for resistant depression would be where I would place it.
Any specific take on its being a better antidepressant in women, postpartum, menopausal? Is there any?
Well, that's a fascinating question. You probably know that in the original meta-analysis, we found that the effect was somewhat larger for women than for men. This was, we could not get our hands around why this happened, and it may have been dose, and there were the U.S. studies kind of dominating there, and men being larger may have needed a higher dose than was studied early on. I don't have a reason to believe that. Serotonin reuptake inhibitors are generally better antidepressants for women than for men. And part of this is because prior to menopause, you have estrogen enhancing serotonin neurotransmission. So there's an endogenous advantage that women may have compared to men for that. But it doesn't mean I don't use it for men, and its sexual side effect profile and weight gain profile are liked by men as well as women. But you asked me the question, and so I think the evidence is that it is slightly favored for treatment of women than for men.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Theis. I think there are no more questions in the chat box now. Thank you very much. Thanks once again for a wonderful talk. Now I would request to hand it over to Dr. Nitin for his comments.
Sir, thank you, Dr. Theis. It was really nice talk. Sir, I have some question. I mean, to MS sir and Dr. Ranjan sir as well as Dr. Theis. So, what is your take? I mean, in the experience, I mean, in your clinical experience, So in a treatment emergent sexual dysfunction, if you see in a commonly available antidepressant, even for the SSRIs, also the commonest side effect is sexual dysfunction. So what is your take on this new molecule Vatuximab? So does this molecule seems to be fine? I mean, going to be beneficial in this condition? Have you, used this
Yes, yes,
molecule in
yes.
such a condition?
Yeah, one of the studies I showed today
Yeah.
was a switch study for people who had that side effect, and it had less sexual side effects than escitalopram in a blinded head-to-head comparison. So if you make a list of the SSRIs in terms of the worst and the best, historically, the worst is paroxetine, the most likely to cause sexual side effects, and the best is fluvoxamine, the least likely to cause sexual side effects. Although fluvoxamine, when you get over 200 milligrams, may catch up. So maybe the advantage of fluoxetine has always been that we tend to use relatively lower doses of it. But I would put this drug on the side of fluvoxamine in being among the lowest of the SSRIs. If you have a belief about duloxetine being lower than the average SSRI, would place it next to duloxetine, or maybe even better than duloxetine, although this has not been systematically studied. But there is no sexual side effect switch study for duloxetine, whereas there is one for vortioxetine. So I at least have the evidence of one well-done study on my side. When you use it first line, you will have less sexual side effects and fewer people quit. When you use it second line for someone who's had that side effect, you will see some. And so I would try to go with the lower dose, but you will see less than if you did another SSRI, other than maybe low dose fluvoxamine.
See, if I can share my clinical experience over a period of time, yes, SSRIs definitely have sexual side effects, but generally it's not much reported. But typically in a patient who has got a major depressive disorder, treated with escitalopram, he does well, he recovers, remission, and then complains of side effects. The first strategy is whether I can come down from 20 to 15 milligrams and 10 milligrams and see whether it is still has antidepressant effect, but sexual side effects are less. Dose related, I did fine. If it doesn't work, the other molecule I was trying is vilazodone, which is
Yes.
available in India.
Yeah.
But vilazodone's efficacy plus its own GI side effects were a limitation factor.
Yeah.
Now, vortioxetine is come handy. It's too early for me to comment on how much of kind of less incidence of sexual side effects, but that's an alternate molecule which seems to be as effective as escitalopram. Maybe over a period of time, we will know what will be the incidence of sexual side effects in the day-to-day clinical practice. That's what my take on this.
Well, Dr. Reddy, I didn't talk about vilazodone today because I forgot to ask if you had it in India or not, and I only realized that about 10 minutes before the talk time that I had forgotten it. But it has exactly the same position in the United States. It's judged to have lower sexual side effects, but harder to implement than SSRIs. And I think harder to implement than vortioxetine, but that is a matter of debate and opinion, not a fact. There is not a head-to-head study comparing vilazodone and vortioxetine.
There's also one question here. I do not know how much relevance that I can ask you. Vortioxetine, can we use it for the negative symptoms of schizophrenia?
I would not use it for the negative symptoms.
Right. Maybe it's difficult to talk on that.
I would use it to treat depression and schizophrenia if I thought the drug-drug interaction profile between the antipsychotic and vortioxetine didn't involve too many secondary effects on serotonin receptors.
Right. I think that's it. Dr. Nitin, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for moderating the event. Thank you, Tej, sir, for making this session lively. Thank you, Ranjan, sir, for your great insight. Now I'll request Mr. Paliwal, who is our marketing head, who will give a vote of thanks. Mr. Paliwal?
Yeah,
Over to
I'm
you.
audible.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, very engaging and very sharp presentation, sir. And looking into the magnitude of the evidence is the talk which is going around this molecule and the increased usage of this drug in the Indian practice. It seems that this drug is going to shape a big thing, and it will be a good drug in the treatment of depression in the Indian practice. So I take this opportunity to extend my sincerest thanks to our international faculty, Dr. Michael Edward Theis, and our program moderator, Dr. M.S. Reddy, and panelist, Dr. Ranjan Bhattacharya, for taking out your valuable and precious time out of your busy schedule. Well, Alkem, with an illustrious journey of over 5 decades, today it commands the status of one of the leading global pharmaceutical company, having footprints over 50 countries, who is engaged in the development, manufacturing, and marketing of generics and specialty products in India and abroad. Today in CNS, Alkem is the top 10 company, and we are present in different therapeutic segments. In Alzheimer's, we are present with Donep M4. In depression, we have launched Voxetin, the brand of Votoxetin. We are present with Nucita, the brand of Escitalopram. In antipsychotics, we have Joychem ODT, Alkepin ODT, and Cupin. And bipolar, we have Valchem OD and Valchem Solutions. So my request to all the participants to extend your valuable support to Alkem products. Our products are widely available across the markets. Thank you so much once again to all the faculty members. Lovely meeting you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all.
And a big thank you from the bottom of the heart to Professor Theis.
It is my great pleasure to be with you this morning, and I'll come back over and over again if you keep asking. Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you
you,
so
Dr.
much, sir. That's so nice of you.
Vedant, we can stop the streaming.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Goodbye. Have
Yeah.
a wonderful evening.
Same to Dr.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Gulshan. Thank you,
Thank
Manish.
you, Dr. Manish. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Gulshan.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ankit.
Thank you, Ankit.
very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Deepak.
Madan.
Dr. Eden.
Yeah, thank you, Deepak sir. Thank you.
We are
Bye.
meeting tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm coming
Mumbai
tomorrow.
University.
Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, bye. Take care. Take care all.